The essence of Nazism. So, the essence of Nazism. A few examples. John Bacon, the gaffer with the stun gun that leaves no marks on the body. You can't see how the victim's being tortured. There's no identifiable marks. Nazi any. There's no isms and schisms. If there's nothing to see, what's the problem in it? So that was one method, with the Kopfhalter keeping the victim chin strapped, silenced, plus electrocuting them into submission and leaving no marks on the body. Another example of their Nazism are their field generator, used in conjunction with the dental neural tapping. You can't see it, you can't smell it, you can't taste it, but you can certainly sense it when it's being used to induce. So from the Baconian method of induction, with Gavy's gaffer John Bacon, the Baconian method of induction, through to Faraday's principle of electromagnetic induction, inducement methods, and the means of inducing torturous stimulus. So that's another aspect of their Nazism. It's difficult to discern. You can't see it unless they put it on display, which they usually do because they want people to know, because they're a bunch of voyeurists and pervert exhibitionists. But it's difficult to ascertain it. So whether the stun gun doesn't leave marks on the body, they're electrocuting someone, or the microvolt dial off the RF field generator as they induce the torture stimulus. Another way of looking at their Nazism: embed a needle in someone's upper thigh, groin, deep enough. It leaves no outward telltale signs that the victim's suffering, that they've got a foreign body embedded deep in their limb. But it's a needle strategically embedded by Nazis in a Northamptonshire hospital. Where was I going with that one? Through the eye of the needle with a needlecraft. There was something I was going to mention about that. Oh yeah, the radiology reports. So then afterwards, you're trying to get a follow-up, independent, trustworthy radiology department to investigate, to uncover what they've done. But they'll have all the radiology departments cover up or make it impossible for there to be any ascertainment of the embedding of the needle. Nazism, nothing to see. If the victim's continuously being played down and they've doctored paperwork to make out they've already checked out the problem, when they haven't, the victim's left stranded. They don't have a leg to stand on. Well, they do. They have the leg with the needle that's been left strategically embedded in the upper thigh groin triangle. They have the disfigured limb with the needle embedded in it to stand on. But in that respect, they don't have a leg to stand on when it comes to getting a follow-up evaluation of what's been done to their leg, because they've doctored they've doctored the medical records, they've doctored radiology reports to cover their backs in the advent of culpable negligence, and Nazism. Can't see where the problem is at, because they won't allow there to be any type of diagnostic procedure in order to ascertain the facts. Can't see the child victim, what's been used to torture them, because the stun gun left no marks on the body. The RF field generator leaves no marks on the body. The embedding of the needle leaves no outward telltale signs that the victim's suffering, but the needle's still strategically embedded 2-3 inches deep into the upper thigh groin. Like I say, this isn't the first time they've had needles stuck into me. As a kid, I remember sitting at Haroldwood Hospital with a gaping hole in my right arm with 4 needles sticking out of it, and a police officer standing over me, waiting for me to bleed to death. And he was the same person involved in setting it up for me to be injured, whereby I'd have severed arteries. And they wanted me to die to get at my mother, because this is shortly after the suicide of PC Philip Holtz, and the only reason they're targeting me is to get at my mother. So now they've got me injured, and I'm in this hospital as a 13-year-old, profusely bleeding, having lost pints and pints of blood. And this police officer's waiting for me to die. And I've got these needles sticking out my arm in this gaping hole in my right arm. Blood all clabber all over the floor. And this police officer looking really pleased with himself, waiting for me to die, like, well, if he dies, he can't write statements about us in the future, can he? He can't say, he won't have anything to say about Havering Atty Bowell London Metropolitan Police Force or Essex County Police's advocating or active involvement in the arranging, facilitating and commissioning of this perversion in these offences that I've been mentioning. This police officer's waiting for me to die. A pool of blood, big gaping hole in my arm, needles all sticking out my arm. When he found out that I wasn't going to die and they'd somehow managed to get a ligature on the artery that was profusely bleeding, he looked gutted and left the hospital. Isn't the first time they've had needles in my groin triangle either. As a kid, with the incision through the scrotum and the needles being placed into the vas deferens, that's exactly where they were being placed, isn't it? But this time, unlike when I was a child, the needles went in and came back out again. On this occasion, in Havering, they put the needles in, caused permanent irreparable damage, but at least had the decency to retract the needles after. In this instance, they've got me up to Kettering General Hospital, strategically embedded the needle into my upper thigh groin triangle, but instead of retracting the needle, they've left it embedded in there. Bedded up for the abuse, haven't they? And this is how it was preemptively. Their tabernacle of treachery. Well, this is just how it is with them. Nazism. Clever Nazism. But the thing is, when they do this to people, they want to turn it into the moral story of a lifetime, don't they? They don't want to do it, and then for it to not have a profound effect upon the psychology of others about them. So they have to do things to mark the body up of the child victim somewhere at some point. So there's telltale signs. So that's how I end up with the incision through the scrotum and the one through the right forearm. Now, you go back 25 years ago, you couldn't just turn around and say, "Oh, my scrotum," and show someone your ball sack, right? Because you'd be deemed crazy, innit? You know what I mean? It's like, how do you show someone that you've been butchered there? But with my right arm, it was easy, because there it is. It's a great big scar on my arm. The thing that I find most bizarre about this is it's like the Petersfield surgery, Haverhill Hill, Romford, Essex, Havering. The Petersfield surgery with the Feldmans and the SS Feldman studies are no different than here in Kettering with Dr. Jonathan Hart of the Headlands General Practice doing the suffering according to John and Dr. SS Tandy of 65 the Headlands. It's very similar. Over in Essex with the Feldmans growing up, they've had my ball sack butchered. They've had injections placed into my vas deferens. It's endocrinology inducing a hormonal disruption or offsetting puberty. And they turned it into a clinical study into academic achievement in pre-adolescence. Like, I could pull out all of these studies that were appropriated from 1990 to 91 that I've been reading about, and these are the same studies that are linked to me being tortured as a kid, turned into clinical evaluations and then published years later on the internet. So it's just so sadist. But yeah, with their Nazism, like at the beginning of this video, what I mentioned, the main aspect to it is being able to cast their victims on grounds of ethnicity or on grounds of religious orientation as being what they want them to be, cast them for the part, and then to inflict as much suffering and torturous stimulus upon the victim, whereby there's no outward telltale signs that the victim's being tortured. So the handheld stun gun that left no marks on the body, but certainly did give a short, sharp shock every time it was used through clothing, or the misappropriation of the pulse volume of the RF field generator's microvolt dial, which was being used to induce. Through to the strategic embedding of needles into their victims as they cover up the embedding of the needle into their victim. So the victim's left lame-legged, afflicted for life, a life sentence. When they put this needle into my leg at Kettering General Hospital at that arthrogram procedure on May the 13th of 2008, they didn't just put she probably thought, I'll put this needle in his leg now, but this Damien Griffin is going to cut it out. They're going to have it removed in a year's time or in 18 months. Well, sorry to tell you, sweetheart, I don't know why you put the needle in my leg or what was going on in your deluded mind, but they certainly haven't taken the needle out of my leg. And I'm still hobbling around in afflicted agony with it embedded in the top of my thigh groin triangle. Whilst Dr. Jonathan Hart and his colleagues and senior members of the clinical directorate here strategically cover up the embedding of the needle in my upper thigh, protracting the suffering. The suffering, according to John, in the protraction and the prostration, very similar to Gary's gaffer, John Bacon, when he had young boys prostrated, as he protracted the suffering, according to John, as he held their butcher ball sacks in his hand whilst giving them a going over. Yeah, Jonathan Hart of the Headland and John Bacon have got a lot in common. Like, Gary Dixon, even very similar to Havering, just like as it was with Bacon when he had his own personal physician at Haroldwood Hospital butchering the ball sacks of young boys he had sterilised. Gary Dixon here had his own surgeon over in the West Country, Warwickshire, Professor Damien Griffin. The Demon Griffin of Coventry, Dixon's personal surgeon who's going to be butchering the victim. For all I know, yeah, I found out some things about these gold alloy dental crowns and their Masonic regalia, their pendants and brooches. It turns out the gold alloy dental crowns used to torture the victims are used as the inlays for the Masonic pendants. And somebody said to me that these surgical pins that they insert into the groin triangle of their victim, these needles and pins that get embedded, that on surgical retrieval, once the victim's been butchered, someone was suggesting that they can be used to be turned into the brooch pins, the fastening pins for their Nazi regalia, their Masonic brooches and medals and medallions and pendants. The Demon Griffin of Coventry, Professor Damien Griffin, and Gary Dixon having me strategically skewed at Kettering General Hospital whilst targeting my daughter in Harpenden, 5 stops down the train track, whilst they've got me laid up under the target machine at Kettering General Hospital's radiology department, having a needle inserted into the top of my thigh groin triangle. Down in the vault, innit, with the microvolt dial on the RF field generator, is Gaffer giving young boys the volts, the microamps out of the handheld stun gun. You know, this is their power trip. This is how they operate. Bright blue-eyed folk with their fair-skinned ways, with their and the thin blue line in the red hackle, electrocuting their victims. You know, this is what they're involved in. And to take my word for it, when their gaffer short, sharp shocked a youngster with that stun gun, that youngster soon became compliant. That you'll have the relatives of John Bacon out there and all the rest of them saying, oh, rent boy this, rent boy that, bullshit lies, Jews talk lies, and all the rest of it. It ain't about rent boys, it's about Gaffer got to torture and rape kids. Then afterwards you give them a hug and say, look here, sunshine, you belong to me now. Here's a $5, don't cry about it, don't say anything to anyone. It's called an unexpected monetary reward on compliance. First of all, he tortures and demeans and belittles and then electrocutes with a stun gun, and then gives an unexpected monetary reward on compliance once he has psychological control of the tortured victim. But enforced sterilisation, all of these war crimes, so say the enforced sterilisation of their victims, the war crime of rape, the war crime of enforced prostitution, the war crime of enforced sexual slavery, they take all of these war crimes and human rights violations as Nazis and they turn them into Lutheran evangelical ministerings. They take these offences and use them as punishments or methods and means whereby they can crucify and torture their victims. So what you've got is the gaffer there, yeah, enforce sexual slavery, enforce prostitution, the war crime of rape. Because that's what that was back then. And that's what his gaffer was doing. And they're no different here, isn't it? You know, with the exploits that get instituted here, it's very similar. I don't know what to say. I'm planning to make some videos and some recordings where I'm going to go back to the stuff that I've written, and I'm going to use it as a structural narrative for the oratory when it comes to mentioning these things. Yeah, war crimes. I'll have to pick that out as well, because the war crime of the enforced disappearance of persons. Now, I've got a copy of the law books in there. I've got like a copy of the Butterworths, Stones' manuals in there somewhere. So like, here's the crime of blasphemy and the general rules on blasphemy. And here's bribery and corruption of public bodies' corrupt practices. And in here somewhere, I've got a list of war crimes and what constitutes serious crimes against humanity, serious war crimes. And I'll pick it out at some point. I'll find what page it's on, because there's a lot of pages in these books, and I'll make a second video explaining some of the human rights violations in war crimes. They turn into religious ministering, that they turn into this perverse occultist religion of theirs. It's just these books are very, very large, so in there somewhere. Disability Discrimination, Law of Property Act, Companies Act, Wildlife and Countryside Act, in there somewhere. Armed Forces, banking, non-commercial movement of animals, Highways Act, God knows. Police Act. Jurisdiction of constables and attestation of constables. Oh, attestation of constables and who's appointed to a police area. Things that I could mention about the police would make your stomachs jump, but won't talk about chief officers of the police force or what it is they managed to orchestrate and institute. Do find it ironic that we've got a Female Genitalia Mutilation Act of 2003, but I've never known a woman to undergo any type of surgical operation that was misappropriated for that reason, but I certainly was. Homicide Act, Police Act, Postal Services Act, Public Health, Environment Protection, very long books, Public Health, Postal Services, Perjury, Peddlers, Official Secrets, that's not in there. Consumer Protection, Civil Rights, what I'm looking for, here we go. Civil rights, freedom of information, civil rights. Disability discrimination, not in there. I'll get back to this in a minute, yeah. I'll post a second video in a moment.